Okay, so my name's Dawn Marie Hutchinson. I'm an executive director with the Office of the CISO at Optiv. Office of the CISO is a team of 30 former chief security officers that make up a team in advisory for Optiv. So we plan, build, run security programs, starting with your security strategy and moving through to building and deploying and providing the services associated with getting that program up and running. We also provide services for managing what you have going on. Today we're talking about breach response. So I'm the former CISO of a Fortune 500 retailer, and I held the spot at a kind of precarious time for CISOs in retail organizations. So certainly everybody recalls when TJ Maxx, Home Depot had their first, but there were some incidents that kind of preceded that we saw things happening in retail that drove the rise of the PCI framework. But then we had the Target incident, which happened late in 2013, and things sort of changed for us in retail. And all of a sudden I found myself underneath my desk in the fetal position pretty much most of my day, which was like, 9 to 9 at that time. So I decided I was going to make myself an expert in breach response. I needed to know that when it happened to us, that we were going to have everything in place. Because I really did feel like when it happened to us, we were going to have these things in place. So I went out and I found myself the best breach lawyer that I could find. And then I seconded that and I said, well, who am I going to bring in for forensics team? And how does that all go down? And so this presentation talks about, one, what happens from the incident management perspective. What happens after you've discovered an incident? What do you do after you've gone through the technical part of your cleanup? You've discovered it. What do you do next? Right? I think we all get our CERT plans, right? Our incident response plans, and some of us have big ones and some of us have small ones, but we don't know what happens after. The legal ramifications that come with incidents, the breach disclosures that happen. And then the secondary question is, this has kind of evolved over time, is what do we do about insurance? Because quite frankly, the insurance providers are in a different place. And that's kind of new for us. Most of us are just now buying our first cyber liability policies. Some of us are a couple years in. I actually happened to ink my cyber liability policy binder on December 6th, which for everybody with a great memory, that was about 2 weeks before the Target breach was disclosed. So I say 15% by switching to Geico that year. So the long and the short of it is there's a disconnect between the CISO and the business units they serve. And it's time that we're kind of getting together and becoming business partners, and that's the start of the breach response conversation. And I like the CINEC golden circle, because for a lot of us, we get stuck in the what we do, right? We secure systems. We lock stuff down. We're looking for threats. We manage risk. We always talk about the what it is that we do. And then we get to the how. Events like this one, you get to your vendor floor and you say, well, I have XYZ branded firewalls. I have a SIM tool. I have advanced persistent threat protection. That's how I do the what I do. But we never really get to the why. Our group is particularly bad as technicians of saying, why are we doing this? And that's the business case for security. So the why are we doing this will help us drive the what we really are trying to do in our communications with the business in and around breach response. So when we start talking about the economics, I love it when I put animations and I forget they're there. But the first is understanding that when we're talking about the economics of breach management, we have to talk about the business case for it, because we all recognize that we're kind of a cost center. And that's really hard for us to drive budget down. It's really hard to make the money come down from management when they don't really see what our value is. So getting to a place where we understand that cybersecurity is an enterprise risk management issue. And this is not an IT function. A lot of us are still reporting into the CIO organizations, or worse, one step down below them, putting us 3, 4, maybe 5 steps below the executive team. That's an indication that your management has not yet recognized that security is an enterprise risk. not a technology risk. Second, understand the legal implications of cyber risks. This is kind of coming back to the beginning when I told you when I was in the seat as a retail CISO, I went looking for the best outside counsel I could find. I went to find a breach lawyer. And the number one question after this is, who is he? I'll give you a list, because I interviewed 5, I have 3, and I have 1 go-to. Number 3, have regular updates and access to cybersecurity experts. So off the CISO we talked about is an advisory function, an advisory arm of Optiv. So I'm an unbilled resource to you. What does that mean? It means you have access to my team of 30 CISOs if you want to bounce some ideas off of us, talk about strategy, make sure you have that like sensical thing. Am I crazy? Being a CISO is a really lonely and isolating job because you're in conflict with people almost every day, but you're not in conflict with me. So have access to other cybersecurity resources, other knowledgeable experts, because if you try to rely on just yourself or just your team, you get caught and kind of don't see your blind spots. You don't know what you don't know. Number 4, establish an enterprise-wide risk management framework. Frameworks are sticky, right? Our internal audit teams love them to check to see if we're adhering to frameworks, but it's the best way to communicate that we are actually doing what we are setting out to do. It is connecting the what we do with the why we do it. Okay, so look into the framework, pick one that matches best for your organization, and roll with it. And then lastly, sit down, talk to your management about how you want to avoid, accept, or mitigate risk, okay, or transfer the risk in the form of cyber liability insurance. So that's going to kind of kick off our next conversation about cyber liability. So the economics of a breach is that $450 billion per year, 5.85 million per breach. So this is roughly what it's costing us every time we have a security incident. So I don't have to read you the numbers because we've all seen it, but the point here is cyber liability insurance isn't going to cover everything. And so what happens is we see these numbers, management sees these numbers, and they say, okay, it cost $100 million for Anthem. I need a $100 million policy. This isn't reasonable, right? So this is how you come back to that, define your enterprise risk management strategy, figure out how you're going to accept, mitigate, or transfer your risks. So here's what the claims paid out at. So there's a negative 3%, a 13% there, or less than 13% of the total cost of a breach was actually paid in insurance claims. So that's just not great math, right? So part of the rest of this conversation is going to be, all right, well, how do I shrink what a breach is going to cost me down so that that, 13% that is, actually covered will be less, right? Or, I didn't say that right. So that what is covered, you cover more. You have less that you're actually having to write the check for. It's interesting, I spoke to a coverage lawyer today, so this is a new thing. I've always said your first call after a breach should be to your cybersecurity counsel. Who's your outside counsel? And then they will engage your forensic provider. Well, I spoke to a coverage counselor, coverage lawyer, and he said, no, call your insurance company first. The minute you think you have an incident, you call them. Because you can follow your policy, you can follow your plan to the letter, but if you haven't called them early in your process, you may find you don't have coverage. Kind of the other flipped side of that was also make sure you've defined all of these people in accordance with your policy before the incident happens. So when you think of it like healthcare coverage, you have in-network, out-of-network, and damn, we are just not paying for it. The same thing happens with cyber liability insurance. So they will have a preferred provider list, and you will be able to choose from the preferred provider list who your forensics team is going to be and who your liability counsel will be. But in addition to that, get your coverage counsel, because that guy's going to start fighting your legal battle to get your claims paid before you've even gotten to the place where they're not paying them. So this was a new revelation for me this morning. I flew in this morning at 11:30, and I was on the phone with this guy on my way here. And he was kind of explaining that to me. So in the vein of reducing that which you actually have to pay for, we're going to start with what are the breach response objectives. Now I'm saying breach response, and we all know that that's like, that word is verboten, right? It's a security incident until somebody says otherwise. So, but for the entire incident management platform, and I should probably update my slide to say the incident management objectives is minimize impact. You're doing nothing more in this process than trying to minimize the impact of the breach. Not just the technical half, not the wiry bits, the what happened, but the legal fallout, the regulatory issues, and everything that will come after for your reputation. So we're minimizing impact across the board. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to demonstrate transparency. So I already said once you discover you've had an incident, then you're going to next call your cyber liability insurance provider and be like, yo, I need a forensics team. And your forensics team is just going to lead you through the exercise. You want to keep your hands up. We wear white hats. We ride white horses. We are good people, and something bad has happened to us. And the best way that we can demonstrate that is by allowing a third party to do what they need to do and provide the facts of the incident. You're establishing reasonableness. Now, this is one of the FTC's and the SEC's favorite words. Was your security program reasonable? Did you do what you were supposed to do is what they're saying. Now, coming back to that framework conversation, if you're following a framework, you most certainly can demonstrate reasonableness. Okay, so make sure that your security program is built on something else other than Bill said so. Last is managed communications. This one's critically important. So at Optiv, we have an enterprise incident management team, and the first thing we tell that team is let's establish right now what the communication schedule is going to be when we go to a client and we manage the incident. My cyber liability lawyers, my three friends, one of them said to me, the worst thing that I see happen in every single incident is the emails and the text messages. Now, most of you don't realize that your text messages are admissible in court. That's all discoverable. So if Bill texts Joe and says, I told John this was a problem 7 months ago, and he never did anything about it, you have just nailed the coffin on gross negligence. So at the time of an incident, we don't text anything. Repeat after me, everyone. We don't text anything. All right, text what time you want to have a call, text the conference bridge number, but beyond that, text nothing. We see it in the email too. We see it from executives. What the hell happened? Right? These are the kinds of big capital letters, exclamation points, jazz hands in email, right? What happened? So you're going to help these people to understand. You're going to use code words. You're not going to put breach, security incident, I don't care what you call it. Call it lollipops, call it mayonnaise, I don't care what you call it, but determine right now so that your executives know when they see an email titled mayonnaise, they need to read it. Okay, so figure out what your communication scheme is now. Like when you leave here, when you go back in on Monday, because let's face it, short weeks, long weeks, whatever. Monday, you're going to go in there and go, let's talk about our communication plan. Folks, let management know how often you want to talk to them also, because that's the other thing. How many of you, as soon as you've had a security, any kind of blip in the radar, right, you got that guy calling. I got an email today, and it says it's from the CFO, but he said he didn't send it, right? Like how many of you have had that phone call, and you've been like, it's Sunday at 2, and I'm at my kid's baseball game, and you're calling me because you got a spoofed email? So make sure they understand right now how often you're going to communicate with them. This is not one of those times that they should be on the phone with you at all the time. All right, so there's my white horse, white hat, John Wayne, right? We're good people. And the best way we can demonstrate that we're good people who do good things is we don't hide anything, we don't delete anything. We are letting the forensics teams do their job. We are giving as much information as we have to your providers. Now, the reason we're calling counsel first, because everyone kind of says that to me, well, you said provide transparency, but you also said call the lawyer first. Right. Transparency within the process. So the lawyer is going to make sure that everything that happens during the course of your investigation is under privilege. So it is in your best interest to celebrate the knowledge that you have and provide what you can. If you don't have it, you don't have it, because I can't tell you how many times someone has to tell us they don't have the logs we need. Next, reasonableness. Was the breach foreseeable? Can you say we are accountable by saying, was this foreseeable? Well, you know, we didn't have firewalls. We shared our root passwords. You know, making sure that shared accounts are off. All of these things account to reasonableness. Did you respond without delay? So this kind of comes back to my initial point about the insurance provider. What's reasonable delay, Ree? What does that really mean? Well, it doesn't mean keep investigating until you're sure you've had an incident. Because if you spend a lot of time digging around, rooting around, trying to figure it out and going it alone, chances are you're either A, going to tip off your bad guy, and everyone's like, oh no, that never happened. I can't tell you how many times that actually does happen. But more than that, the longer it takes you to pull in somebody to demonstrate your white hat wearing self, the harder it is for us to demonstrate that you responded in a timely fashion. Okay, appropriateness. Did you follow appropriate procedures? And last, credibility. Limit the interest of limit conflict of interest. And do we have any CIOs in the room, VPs of infrastructure? Oh, I got one. Keep your hands off the stuff. Can't tell you. Can't tell you how often. So because the CISO or the director of security, whoever's the top of the heap in security, often bumps into a situation where their boss is responsible for some element of the breach. Some sort of process breakdown, or worse yet, he's thinking it's his fault because something happened on his watch. Well, it's also your job to tell him his baby's ugly, right? But the same way if you go to the emergency room, you're not allowed to operate on your own child. This is the same situation. Keep your CISO, your CIOs, your VPs of infrastructure, your very smart, very knowledgeable people off the controls, because it's very, very hard to demonstrate appropriateness and credibility if the person with the most to lose in the case of a breach is at the keyboard at the time. It's a crisis management thing. It's a scientific fact about people under pressure. They do careless things. Keep an honest man honest and keep him off the keyboard. All right, so communications. I have been fried 50 ways for Sunday for this slide, but I will tell you it matters because more careful analysis takes time. It increases the certainty. You know what you've lost, and more importantly, you're reducing costs. So I don't care if Brian Krebs calls you every day. And I don't care if his message board is lit up like Christmas time with people telling you you should be saying more, you should be disclosing more. We, the security community, are the worst about this. Want more information. How are we supposed to protect our companies if you don't share? Your loyalty is first to your employer, to your company. You are in the position to protect your company in every capacity, and that might mean waiting until you know what happened. We'll use Target as the example. 30 million credit cards, right? Everybody knows that story. 30 million credit cards were impacted, not stolen. And I don't care if they're in, invite the bad guys into tea, right? They can't leave with the data, right? So after Target gets done with all their forensics, when Strauss Friedberg packs up and leaves, turns out less than 1% of the credit card data that was reported was actually exfiltrated. Take the time, do it right. Okay, so don't get quick to announce because you've got pressures from the media, pressures from management, pressures from your PR team to step up and give the information too quickly, because you create your legal class of victims as soon as you disclose that. So 30 million transactions were impacted. That's how many transactions went by the malware. That's not how many left, and that's important. So make sure you're taking the time in order to manage the communications out. You need those two things done first. All right, so who's on the team? Right, you have your technical team. These are your guys you work with all the time. This is the team that knows that you're doing your red team exercises, you're tabletopping with them, you've practiced, you've done the drills. These are your guys that know the stuff. The next is the business team. This is your executive team, general counsel, media relations, and customer relations. Don't lose sight of whoever is responsible for the employees that face customers. So as the head of a retailer, we had to have a very specific communication plan drafted for store employees. Because it's very easy to sit back in your corporate office and tell everybody not to say anything. But as soon as Krebs reports it or the news gets it, your frontline employees, or in my case, 16-year-olds, are left talking to the customer. Make sure you know what they're going to say. Okay, so in that business team, make sure that's covered. Your outside support teams are outside counsel, forensic provider, and insurance provider. Outside counsel being the two, your breach lawyer and your coverage lawyer. So they should not be from the same firm. That was part of the conversation I had today, because what ends up happening is the breach lawyer is arguing that insurance should pay for their work. So if your breach lawyer and your coverage lawyer come from the same firm, it's like, Reed Smith is demanding their money, and we think you should pay them because we, Reed Smith, are also coverage lawyers, right? It's self-serving, it doesn't look right, it ends up being ugly. So make sure you have two firms for that. All right, so everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. This is one of my favorites. So when you have your incident response plan, I have seen some crazy incident response plans, like 84 pages. Who's guilty of the 50-plus page incident response plan? Oh, you're lying. Forget it. So your incident response plan should wave like this, and it should include things like Bill is a certified incident handler. Bill will follow industry standards for blah, 5 bullets. Because if you have step 23A1D and Bill misses step 23A1D, negligence. Those lawyers love that stuff. Okay, so don't have step 23A1B. So it should wave like this. It should not go on the table like a phone book. And I have seen them. I have seen them in these gigantic binders. I have seen them stored on network shares listed incident response plan because, I'm sure your hacker didn't think to look there, right? So let's be logical about how we're doing things, okay? Again, mayonnaise. I once was a QSA at some point, and my pen tester got in 20 minutes, which was just horrifying, right? As a CISO, that's horrifying. And so I'm on the phone with him, and I'm sitting in front of the client, and I'm like, can you just give me some background? He goes, well, I don't know. There was a folder on their network share that said, don't touch these servers. So I touched them. Right? Let's be smarter than that. We're cool kids. Show it. All right, so here's your takeaways. Data assets and inventories. Now, this is not a security issue. This is a business one. If you said to the business, tell me where our PII is, they go, oh, I don't know. IT does it. All right, well, what applications are using it? I don't know. We use, Giggledy Watts. Oh, I'm standing right in the middle of the slide. My apologies. All right, so I use Giggledy Watts, and that produces all the information that there ever was. Some other places that we see kind of hang-ups is when you're trying to demonstrate what data is lost and what data is not, because there's 4 states right now that are requiring you to disclose even if you lose encrypted data. And the reason for that is your business people and their data assets, because they will tell you that all of creation needs access to this data to do their job. But only 5 of them need actual access to critical data. The rest of them can live in some sort of homogenized environment where they get only what they need. But so find out what your data is, where it is, and what the assets are that store them. Security as a cultural norm. We all kind of can group hug this one out, right? We all wish that our management and organization would get it on a security level. We all wish we had those fantastically expensive but awesome behavioral analytics tools that would tell us when something bad is going on in our environment. So, all right, so do we have any Catholic folks? I'm Irish Catholic, I'm the youngest of 7. We got a couple Irish folks, all right. So we all know when to kneel, we got it when to stand, right? We do the same routine every Sunday. We have been raised on it. It's a cultural norm in your family. But when you pick up and you go to your nephew's first communion You know, we'd all like to say that the church is pretty standard, but you find yourself standing when everyone else is kneeling. And you find yourself kneeling when everyone's standing, and you've got it feels like this should work, right? I'm raised Catholic. It's a cultural norm for me. Well, this is the equivalent of you all being trained in security. Your bad guy's also trained in security, but he doesn't know what goes on in your home church. So if your home church has a culture of security, that you all know the rules, you all know when to stand, and you all know when to kneel, he's going to be standing when you're kneeling if you have a good cultural norm set up in your organization. So figure out how you want to operationalize security such that you can see that guy sooner. Establish your key teams and resources now. This is a hard one to sell, so we all get it. You guys are all going to leave here and say, Ree from Optiv said, I need to find my outside counsel now, I need to find my forensic provider now, and I need to get them on retainer right now. And all management is going to hear is, I need money. I need the keys to the Porsche, right? That's what they hear. But we know that you can save millions in a breach. Larry Poneman has proven it out a dozen different times in a dozen different models. If you have these key teams in place now, you can save tons of money. Okay, you might not be a doctor, but you can stay in a Motel 6? Whatever. You get the idea. So get those teams in place now. Coverage lawyer is new to me. And I took some notes, so if anybody wants more information on the coverage lawyer, how to get your insurance premium down, insure coverage, I have a whole that I'm happy to send you. My info's on the last slide. Discourage blame storming. This is really hard. That comes back to that text that I mentioned. You know, like, we wear white hats, we ride white horses, we do good things. So let's try to ensure or get your management on board with the fact that security incidents are eventualities. Having somebody in the environment is likely. Having someone take stuff, maybe not as likely, but if they do, blame storming costs money. So don't do that. I mean, it just doesn't work out. It doesn't play out well. And unfortunately, as security folks, you know, the finger ends up pointing at us, and we all kind of do this whole like, but you promised me 8 people and a $2 million budget, and I didn't have those things. And so you end up on this internal bickering while you've got a lawyer on the phone at $1,000 an hour. You guys are bickering about whose fault it is. You know, $30,000 later, you're no further in your investigation, but your lawyer's buying his new yacht. Okay, so let's be mindful of that. So early communications equate to bigger expenses. I don't know if I pointed this out earlier. Maybe you missed it. Don't go early. Okay, get your facts, get your report, get your forensic provider, and get your company back up and running. Focus on the things that matter for your company and ignore the noise. We don't care what the media thinks. It's a proven fact Americans are in breach fatigue right now. They kind of are a little bit like, oh, are you going to send me a lollipop? And that's what it is, right? At this point, it's a lollipop. Because $3.95, I can go online and I can get your identity and all of that crap. You've been breached so many times, all your information's out there. We all know it, they all know it. But they're still going to send you some identity theft protection in the mail. Like, but didn't you just lose my credit card number? What does that have to do with anything? It's a lollipop. Okay, so just focus on what you need to do, which is get your company back up and running, get your company clean, and get your facts straight. Clear communication, guidelines, and timelines. So I am going to report back to you management every day at 5 o'clock. We will have a conference call to discuss mayonnaise at 5 o'clock every day. Whatever it is, figure out what your communication schedule is that works for your management. Sometimes they want to know, sometimes they don't. Determine now if you're ready. Have your lawyer go through, your lawyer and your forensic provider do an incident response readiness test so that you can kind of start to bring light to this communications issue so that your management understands what the expectation is. But you can't do that until you know if you're ready. Document your first steps in practice. Notice I said first steps, not your 23A1D. So what are your first steps? You're triaging, you're taking care of the technical incident response plan. I'm not going to lecture you on that because most of us know what to do in our sleep now. That's the part we know. The parts that we don't know is when are we prepared to ask for help. right? We're demonstrating reasonableness. We're taking accountability. We have identified a security incident that may have involved data, and we're reaching out now early to legal counsel so that any conversation will be underprivileged and not disclosed in a court of law. Establish your breach management objectives. What did I say it was? Oh, come on. Minimize impact. Okay, so your breach response objectives should be the same, but put 3 bullets under there in the coming back to the Synnex Golden Circle. Why are we doing this? All right, I keep standing in front of your slides. So coming back to the why we do this. And your breach response objectives, your why you're doing this, should very closely tie with your organizational mission and vision statements. And this is a good way to have this conversation. Lastly is the legal rule of 3. And this is kind of a giggly thing, but it's an actual thing in incident management. You may not, under any circumstances, ever say things like, we didn't have enough money. It interfered with the business. It takes too long. Okay, so those are the legal rule of 3. Any one of those, and they're going to go, oh, you're in. I mean, that's the same as admitting guilt. So understand and talk to your management right now about the things that you are not going to be able to say to get you out of court in a breach, and that's, it costs too much, the business didn't like it, interferes, blah, blah, blah. Or it doesn't align with business. That was the last one. Takes too long, okay? Because people say that to me all the time. Oh, well, that was on the budget plan for next year. We pushed it off of this year. Or it was on the budget plan for next year, and they go, but we see it here. Yeah, we didn't get it done. That's not going to work. Okay, so figure those kinds of things out now. So I'm with Optiv. Oh gosh, that's really small. I'll hang around after. If you can see it, you can see it. But I'm Dawn Marie with a hyphen because my parents are those people. Hutchinson, Dawn Marie Hutchinson at optiv.com. Okay, so if you have questions, you can email me. Like I said, I just talked to the Insurance Coverage Council this morning, so that kind of didn't make it into the slides. But go ahead, you have a question.
I think you promised the economics of the so I still think you can do that, but you really need to address opportunity costs, next best alternative. I know you can make a great case for it. That's how you've got to be able to express it to business people. Because they're thinking, just like my dad would say, you want to be on time, be early. Well, Dad, that means I've got to leave something else early. So you have to do 2 things. To do this, you got to do less of something else. And this has to be shown to provide a better return. That's the economics. This is great how-to, but the economics comes down to that shortage of time and other resources. I have to help.
Yep. Right, so we're minimizing impact. The economic impact is you have to do these steps in order to minimize the kind of the cost to the company and figuring out which steps are most valuable. So I guess what we're, I understand what you're saying on opportunity cost, but I think what we're really talking about here in terms of pitching it to management is it's going to cost us more if we don't do these 5 things. Larry Poneman will tell us this is how much a breach costs, this is how much it costs if we don't exercise these preparedness steps, and this is the deviant on your transfer risk opportunity, because we see that come up a lot as management will say, we have insurance, or how much insurance do we need? I get that one a lot, because they always start out with $100 million. I just kind of go, oh, okay, but they're not going to pay PCI fines. And specifically, the lawyer told me this morning not to call them fines, to call them assessments. Payment card industry standard. So anybody who processes credit cards follows the standard, and they have to pay for all of the card replacement costs, any fraud on those transactions. And so the brands will come back to your company and ask for that money back. And the insurance providers historically go, no. So there are ways around that, and it kind of comes down to reporting. You had a question?
Yeah, you mentioned Brian Krebs a couple of times.
Yeah.
Something with credit monitoring versus alternatives.
Okay.
I believe he proposed not paying for credit monitoring here, but he also wanted consumer credit.
Right.
It came up with terms like credit free for you, like credit
Mm-hmm.
consumer.
Right.
Which way,
Yeah, so it's very funny because I happen to be friends with Brian Krebs, and the reason is because during the Target incident, my CEO said, well, you have to tell me what happened. And I was like, well, nobody knows yet. It's just was released. And he's like, well, I need you to find out. We have a meeting with the board on Friday, and it was like Wednesday. And I called Brian directly. So he and I have had quite a few conversations around this, because what ends up happening is you sign up for credit monitoring, and then what happens, or what has happened twice? The credit monitoring company was breached. So you've just extra given. But you can put a freeze on your accounts through TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax that prevents any opening of new accounts. This is great for people who are terrific at managing their credit, because I always say I don't shop where I bank, I don't bank where I shop. So if you're not one of those people that opens a credit card to save 5% on that transaction, the freeze works great. You already have a home loan, you already have a car loan, and to lift it, all you have to do is call, verify your identity over the phone. They'll lift the freeze. You open whatever, you need a new car, and then you freeze it back up again. I definitely advocate that over the credit watch, credit monitoring. And also that doesn't cover you, the kind of unspoken thing. I know there's some folks here from healthcare. The biggest risk right now is on your healthcare identity, and there's some new products coming out on how to monitor that, but I highly recommend you follow your explanation of benefits that come in the mail. So that's the first indication of healthcare fraud, is when you get an explanation of benefits for services you didn't receive. You had another question?
Well, I tried some years ago to check on my credit reports, and I got it quite far on the phone, and I got to a bare portion of most recent past address, which was about 20 years before the reports I could remember. I later discovered, it's on my last credit report, and I could just read this over the phone. But that is wrong.
Okay.
The means they use to establish identity is too much.
Yes. Yes, it is. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else have a question? Go ahead.
Why is it the 733,000
Oh, right. Because the major costs associated with the breach are coming in the forms of those fines and penalties that come from compliance violations and PCI recovery, right? So our most expensive breaches are the credit card ones right now. And so that is not paid back. Target's breach, they have been hesitant to identify what that actual number is, and it's hard to quantify because it was Christmas time and their sales were down, but they also gave discounts and things, so it's very hard to quantify. But in the actual real costs of breach, the majority of the money comes out in repaying the card brands and the banks, and that is generally not covered. And again, this kind of comes back to, for those of you who are looking at new policies or renewing policies, good time to reach out to Coverage Counsel. I also have those. I only know 2 of those. I feel like it's a new phase of law. But the point of that is maybe consult with them now and find those clauses. So when I bought my policy for Urban, there was this anti-terrorism clause that says it won't cover any act that originates from abroad. So I found that, and oops. There was also one bite in there that it would not pay out on attacks of theological or ideological means. So you have to find those things and get them out, and the best way to do that is to be a junior lawyer type person and find those places, or to have Coverage Counsel. When you think about, so Coverage Counsel, to spend an hour with them is going to cost you about $600. Just do it. It'll save you millions on the backside, right? Same thing with breach counsel. You can interview these guys and have some great fact-finding information moments with them for free, because they're going to do their first session because they want your business, right? And then if you want a follow-up conversation, all right, so it costs you $1,000, right? This is cheap money in the scheme of the breach management thing. And a lot of my presentation came from those conversations, and then of course the fact that I really buddied up to 3 of them, and I've given this presentation with the coverage counsel that I talked to this morning and a breach lawyer. Not this one so much, but a variant of. Was there another question? Yeah. That's, yeah. And so it's kind of, I'm not moving off that slide so that you stop asking questions about it. I'm moving back so that you can get my contact information. But yes, so that's kind of comes down to that coverage question around how much insurance do you actually need. If you don't carry credit card data, oh, come on. If you don't have credit card data, you're not going to need as high a policy. Areas to look out for that we see coverage, we're not seeing it covered is how many people have had that mysterious email from the CEO asking that $30 million be wired to him at this number. So insurance is going to cover that because somebody was sitting behind the keyboard, made a business decision, you didn't have a control in place to limit that risk, they're not going to pay that. So keeping those kinds of things in mind makes you really want for some of those tools, you know what I mean? But we see that, we're seeing that one a lot. Right now we're seeing a lot of ransomware activities, and insurance is not going to pay your ransomware payout. So if you decide you're going to pay, they are not going to pay you back. So plan for that. Look at your backup model too, because we're seeing a lot of companies not really having their backup strategy working great in those ransomware circumstances. Anybody else? Because I moved off that slide. You've got nothing else, right? I don't like numbers. Huh? All right, so there's my contact information. Optiv is partnered with Intel here today at the booth. So you can get more information back there. And of course, I'm available if you have questions. Oftentimes for this presentation, people don't like to raise their hand and ask too much detailed questions. And I'm amenable to that. So I'll hang out just in case you do have a question that you probably don't want to share with the entire audience. All right? So have a great night.